Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, where I'm currently having an incredibly busy week, recording 12 episodes this week, just so you guys and girls don't feel neglected while I'm away on my holidays in sunny Mexico. But I genuinely mean it when I say I enjoy serving you, my loyal audience. Now, while I am away, have no fear, I will be checking my emails and tweets, because there really is no such thing as a digital detox in my world. So remember, you can keep me company by sending me your cocktail recommendations, and I'll raise my glass to you in your very own personal shout out. But hey, this isn't Neil's travel podcast, it's a tech podcast where I interview a different guest every day about how technology is transforming our life, and of course the world of business across multiple industries. And this year there is a lot of talk about GDPR, and yes, we all know about its potential impact. And as users, we've finally stopped receiving those dreaded emails. And for businesses, avoiding penalties and achieving compliances are two very important goals for their GDPR readiness programme. But there's another great goal that shows the true value of GDPR preparation, which of course is earning the consumer's trust. Now, the reason I bring this up is because Patrick Salyer, General Manager of SAP Customer Data Cloud, who was also previously the CEO of Gigya, he caught my attention recently when he said that the past offers great insight into how businesses should react to GDPR by directly addressing the trigger point of waning customer trust to comply with new regulations and take your business to the next level. Now, this was my kind of language, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Mountain View, which I'm reliably informed is just south of San Francisco, so we can speak with Patrick Salyer, General Manager of SAP Customer Data Cloud. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thanks for having me. My name is Patrick Salyer. I was previously the CEO of a company called Gigya, now the general manager of the SAP Customer Data Cloud. And this is post-Gigya being acquired by SAP late last year. The SAP Customer Data Cloud, just for context, is a platform to help businesses build trusted relationships with their consumers. And we do this basically three ways. We first allow consumers to self-identify through login registration across any website or application. The second thing we do is enable those same consumers to provide consent or provide permission to access their information, to share their information. And finally, we take this data that's being provided by these consumers, permission-based, and integrate that into marketing and service sales applications to provide better, more personalized experiences. And this is a platform that's actually used by over 500 customers today. We help manage over 1 billion permission-based customer profiles, so pretty scaled at this point.
Now, one of the reasons I invited you on the show today is the dust may have settled a little, and most people listening will be all too familiar with GDPR and its potential impact that has caused businesses all around the globe to invest resources worth billions of dollars into compliance initiatives. Clearly, avoiding penalties and achieving compliance are two important goals for any GDPR readiness programme. I think we can all agree on that. But there's another goal that shows the true value of GDPR preparation, which is earning the consumer's trust. And that's a lesson from another regulatory watershed moment, Sarbanes Oxley, SOX, and the banking crisis of 2002. But can you set the scene a little bit and offer a brief overview of that moment for our younger listeners and why it's so relevant now?
Yeah, no, sure, I'd be happy to. And yeah, some people may find this one a head scratcher, but we think it makes a lot of sense. And Sarbanes Oxley, for those of you that can't remember, was a regulation that went into effect around 2002, and this was post some massive finance scandals. But some of you might remember Enron. And the end goal of this regulation was to essentially put the faith back in the public and investors' mind around companies and how they account for their finances. Now, how does that compare to GDPR? What's the similarities here? At the end of the day, we think GDPR was really about putting faith back in consumers, back in the public's mind around how their data is being managed and leveraged and utilized by brands. So it's essentially the end goal is very similar with both Sarbanes Oxley and with GDPR, it was at the end of the day about trust, and there was some regulation to develop into that, but that's really where it came from.
And I've read a lot recently that you believe that we're currently in that Sarbanes Oxley moment, but people just aren't actually thinking about it yet. So can you tell me more about why you think this, and also any other similarities that you've noticed?
Well, I'd say as a starting point, many businesses took a very sort of manual approach to Sarbanes Oxley at first. And I would argue taking that sort of approach ended up costing those businesses a lot more money in the long run. And instead of seeing this as kind of a new way of doing business. And I would say GDPR is very similar. So in some cases, we are seeing businesses basically take the very minimalistic approach to becoming compliant, literally just thinking about this as a checkbox, someone's opted in or opted out, to the point where they may actually rely on completely manual processes. So someone will call and ask to be opt out of marketing communication, and that sets forth literally email chains or calls coming from support to the marketing ops person and then to the customer service person and so forth. It's just completely manual. And what that's leading to is incredible inefficiencies. And I think it's really about, in the same way Sarbanes Oxley was a new way to do business in general. It was like kind of a new way that you had to think about accounting. This is the same thing with GDPR. It's a new way to think about marketing, sales, and service that has to be incorporated from the ground up. Another example, I think, is for Sarbanes-Oxley, many international businesses thought this was kind of U.S. only. And if you're international, you didn't have to worry about it. But what businesses soon realized is that if they wanted to do any business in the U.S., they needed to comply. So it almost became in some ways, a global standard. The most stringent standard is often the global standard. GDPR is the same thing. So although it's European-based regulation, what North America businesses are actually finding out is that if they actually do any business, so to speak, with EU consumers, is something they need to comply with. So again, some very, very similar learnings, and I think those businesses that are seeing this in a more comprehensive fashion are those that are actually getting the most benefit for their business moving forward.
So do you think the past offers insight into how businesses should react to GDPR? And assuming that you do, why do you think that it is that we so often fail to learn from these cycles from our history?
Yeah, I do think the past actually gives us a lot of teaching here. And I think the teaching here is that this should be a watershed moment. And it should be a moment where we're thinking about GDPR, as we go back to the beginning of the conversation, is about trust. And what we've seen from data is that consumers are very likely to share data with a brand if they actually have transparency and control around how that data is being used. There was a recent survey that said over 75% of consumers would actually share data if they were going to actually be given those controls. And guess what? We know that consumers do want personalization, right? That's why you see so many users on places like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, but they don't want it at any cost. That's why when we've seen some recent issues Facebook has had, we've seen the stock price drop, right? That's what we're learning here. And so I think that the businesses that are getting this right are actually thinking about this from the starting point of what relationship do I want with my users, right? What information do I actually want to have to provide better experiences, and how am I going to communicate to those users that they have the right to understand those things and to control, how that data is being leveraged and utilized. And I think, unfortunately, you're going to have a series of businesses, same thing with Sarbanes-Oxley, that take just kind of a step-by-step approach. And because of that, I think they're gonna miss this business benefit, and the sort of infrastructure costs are going to be much, much higher. You're going to have other businesses that are saying there's a new way to develop these relationships, one where I think at the very beginning, how do I want to communicate? How do I want to be transparent? How do I want to provide controls? And then what kind of infrastructure do I need to actually make that happen? And so that's the difference here. And in terms of why we're not learning from the past, I think it's human nature, right? It's hard to invest up front. But again, those businesses that do, I think, are getting enormous returns in the long run.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, for many business leaders listening to us talk here, I suspect that you've just delivered that moment of reflection. So how should or can they directly address the trigger point of waning customer trust and actually comply with new regulations and take their business essentially to the next level?
Well, look, I'm seeing a lot of businesses think you can solve this by just hiring a sort of a privacy expert or data protection officer and just say it is this person's responsibility for actually becoming compliant and solving this problem. And you really can't take that approach. I mean, yes, you do need a privacy expert. Yes, you do need a data protection officer. But this ultimately is a C-level initiative that's going to impact the CIO, it's going to impact the CMO, it's going to impact the chief digital officer, the CDO, because we're talking about a change to the way you market to users, you sell to users or service users, the change the way you build direct digital connections with customers. It's talking about getting consent for each and every consumer and then actually orchestrating that consent to knowing, do you have the right to market to this person, to call this person, to actually service and sell to this person, and so forth. So literally you touch every single C-level executive. So I think this really has to be getting all the right folks in a room, talking about what is the type of customer experiences that you want to develop with your consumers. And then starting with actually these use cases, these actual customer journeys that you're trying to accomplish, and then moving to the infrastructure. And guess what? The privacy officer, the data protection officer, they need to weigh in and be a champion within that. But they're certainly not going to be able to change customer journeys, change experiences. I mean, it's really got to come from the top down.
Now, one of the reasons I invited you on the show today is because I feel that the entire industry desperately needs modernising for a new digital era where privacy, trust and transparency are becoming the new currency. And in June, I couldn't help but notice that SAP announced a new suite of solutions to modernise CRM and a new data management suite to boot. So can you tell me more about that move and the reasons behind it?
It's pretty exciting. We've just launched SAP C4 HANA. And to provide more context there, at SAP, we believe that there's a new generation of CRM required. And I mean, the way to think about this is we think the world has changed since what we would think of as legacy CRM, right? Just think about what consumers want. Consumers want services, not products. We're hearing all about this next generation of consumers that don't want to own cars, right? Don't own houses. I mean, they actually are thinking about ownership in a much different way. And so what you're just seeing consumer demand change. Think about how this is actually impacting valuations of companies. So I think Apple is actually a really interesting example, and their stock price has been just doing amazingly. And actually, if you uncover it, I don't think just the fact that they've built great products is enough. They've actually built a massive services business with iCloud, Apple Music, et cetera. This is a multi-billion-dollar services business growing super rapidly. And what we're seeing is that services companies, we're seeing this with software as a service companies in particular, are being valued actually much more highly than product companies. So Apple's stock is jumped. So again, we see this move that consumers want services, right? That's new. Consumers want personalization. That's not new, but they want transparency and control. They don't want personalization at any cost. Consumers are really done with creepy. They really don't want creepy experiences anymore, right? They want control over their data. We've moved from a world of so you have these trends, and I'd say it's difficult for legacy CRM to address these new trends, these changes in consumer demand. I think that's because we've gone from a web-only world to one with lots of privacy concerns. We've gone from we now have a multi-platform world, GDPR world. There's a lot of new security concerns. So take this together, right? Consumers have changed. They're demanding new things. The world is changing, which is causing kind of legacy CRM to compete. And that's why we've developed this new C4 HANA platform. Think about this as the fourth generation, really the next generation platform for CRM. And this starts with what we call a consent-driven data model, which of course is the SAP Customer Data Cloud, giving consumers the right to control how their information is used, given that transparency, right? Being able to manage their preferences, and actually taking that information to deliver best-in-class commerce, marketing, service, sales applications. And so that's the end goal. That's the end commitment. And we're actually making this a reality through several different best-of-breed companies that have been acquired over time, starting with Hybris, which is the leading commerce company in the world. And then, of course, Gigya was acquired to manage the customer data cloud. We acquired a very large public company called Calidus to help expand our sales capabilities, and then most recently a company called Core Systems to expand service capabilities. So one of the biggest investments that SAP is making is actually in this area, so it'll be pretty exciting to see what happens moving forward.
I'm glad you mentioned there that customers are done with being creepy, because for nervous business leaders listening, there's kind of mixed messages at the moment. So, where do they begin to turn the concept of universal data into reality, but without being deemed creepy by their customers? Because I think customers accept giving away personal information to different brands and different companies depending on how important they are. For example, you'd be quite happy for your bank or your favourite airline to know a lot more about you than somewhere where you've made one purchase from. It's quite a delicate balance, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the question, right? I mean, this is sort of creepy is an interesting thing. We kind of know it when we see it, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity to improve here, and it takes both infrastructure, but it also takes, again, thinking about that experience that we want to support with our customers. And I'll tell you, I actually had a personal experience just yesterday that I felt this was really done right, and it was with this company 23andMe, which actually gives you a readout of your DNA. You've probably heard of it.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing because this company, I mean, if you think about it, this is extremely sensitive information, as you know. And the importance of being extremely transparent with what they're asking for and what they're going to do with that information is so critical. I mean, trust is everything for that business. And what was really, really great is they took an extremely transparent and granular approach to how they're asking for permissions, and a step-by-step approach where they're explaining every step of the way what they're asking for permission for, what they're going to do, and how you could revoke it later. And they even ask for things like being able to leverage your information to help with research. And they would say why you might want to do that or why you wouldn't want to do that. And this is a very extreme example I get because it is talking about your own personal health information. But I would argue that sort of approach is the future. Consumers get it. They get that they want better marketing, better service, so they want better experiences, and they're willing to share information. But what's the consumer going to get out of it? I mean, that's the value exchange that we need to think about. And if you do that right, you increase trust, and increasing trust means you increase retention, which means you have a massive business benefit. So I think that's really the way to start thinking about this.
Yeah, I completely agree. A great example there. So is there any other advice that you can offer businesses on how they can increase customer retention and boost brand loyalty by simply providing a transparent, flexible and secure digital experience?
Well, the one thing I often say to C-level leaders is a very simple starting point is to think about when you don't know who a consumer is, they're anonymous to you, what's the typical lifetime value of that consumer versus when you actually know who that consumer is. They've self-identified. They provide you an email address, a phone number. How valuable is that consumer? And typically what we see is it can be 5 to 10 times more valuable. And then you sort of think about in today's world where consumers expect transparency and control, and GDPR is actually mandating it, you have to really think carefully about how do you allow those users to self-identify. And you have to think about different opportunities in your customer journey that you can actually allow consumers to do that. And that's both on web, that's both in mobile, this can now be in store. There is in cars, I mean, in vending, every opportunity exists to allow that user to identify themselves. And again, that goes back to this is a C-level conversation across the CIO, CMO, CDO, CEO's office to think about that very, very holistically. That becomes super critical.
Well, another question I feel I must ask you is about your future plans at SAP and how it's evolving, especially in this new blockchain era. So is there anything you can share with us on that front too?
Yeah, we don't have any immediate announcements, but look, this is going to be a critical component of delivering this idea of the intelligent enterprise, which is really thinking about a holistic suite, helping businesses understand their customers all the way from what we would call the front office. So when a consumer is just a lead or just a prospect, really anonymously visiting a site or application, to when they're a full-fledged customer and you're actually going through procurement and actually shipping product and getting paid. So if you think about the history of ERP, very powerful, SAP is within ERP, really that back office supply chain technology. Now thinking about how you can actually connect that to the front office, I'll say this is something that only SAP can deliver. I think those legacy CRM companies aren't prepared and don't have the assets to think about the holistic customer journey. And I think that's what you're going to see a lot of investments and a lot of future announcements around.
So before I let you go, can you just remind the listeners of where they can find SAP online and also contact your team, of course, if they have any questions about that conversation we started today?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, you can find us online, sap.com, or Google SAP Customer Experience. You can also Google SAP Customer Data Cloud. Feel free to reach out to me directly. You can find me, of course, on Twitter, just at Patrick Salyer, on LinkedIn, or you can email me directly, patrick.salyer@sap.com.
Well, there's so many talking points from listening to you there. Like you said, the world has changed. People want personalisation. Customers want new experiences, but they do want greater trust, greater transparency, and they're definitely done with being creepy. I also like how you mentioned there the cycles of history and what we can learn from that, and how currently we could be in a Sarbanes Oxley moment, but people just aren't thinking about it yet. So many talking points, but just a big thank you for coming on today.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Appreciate you having me.
I've said one too many times here on this podcast about how we can all learn from our past. Sure, I'm old enough to see that history always happens in cycles. Whether it's the first industrial revolution and how textile workers rebelled against technology, or Henry Ford saying if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse rather than a car. And of course, more recently, Bill Gates trying to convince an unconvinced world about the internet on the David Letterman show back in 1995. And many of the lessons learned back then have never been more relevant right now. And education, adoption and learning from our past mistakes or history are so important to our success, whether it be in business or in our own lives. I loved how Patrick argued there that we're currently in a Sarbanes Oxley moment, but people just aren't thinking about it yet. And he could be onto a point, especially if you consider the similarities. I mean, both predictions seek to enhance transparency as a means to curb poor business practices and build trust. Both are regional regulations that had global consequences, and both regulations created a need for holistic solutions that span the entire organisation. And just like the reaction to the Sarbanes-Oxley moment, many companies are using GDPR compliance initiatives as an opportunity to gain a competitive advantage. So it's easy to see that the past really does offer insight into how businesses should react right now. But this is just me and Patrick sharing our opinions. But what makes this show unique is that you, the listener, with your insights and your expertise, have the platform too. So I'm going to pass the virtual baton over to you, and I want to make your voice heard. And maybe we can all learn a thing or two together. So you can do that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, or you could go to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, go to podcasts, and you'll find an accompanying blog post for this episode. And there'll be a little button where you can push and leave me a virtual voicemail. I do try to make it as easy as possible for every single person listening to get involved. So what are you waiting for? But that's it for me today. So a big warm thank you for choosing to tune into this show again today. And I hope you'll join me again tomorrow, where I have another great guest. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.